When it comes to solving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, a lot of people talk about a two-state solution. But what does that actually mean? It means that in addition to the current Jewish state, Israel, Palestinians would get a state of their own in territory currently controlled by Israel. 2 states for 2 peoples. According to polls, most Israelis and Palestinians agree, in vague terms, that this is the best plan. So have most U.S. presidents, the UN, and the majority of world powers.
The world today supports the notion of a two-state solution.
So, what's the problem? First off, everybody might think that 2 states is a great idea, but to be clear, nobody can exactly agree on what the borders of those 2 states should be. Where would Israel end and Palestine begin? Many call for a return to the 67 borders, also known as the Israeli borders before the Six-Day War. President Obama said in 2011,
"We believe the borders of Israel and Palestine should be based on the 1967 lines with mutually agreed swaps."
But with borders comes the question of the Jewish settlements in the West Bank. Since 1967, some 450,000 Jews have moved to cities and villages in areas captured and controlled by Israel, in what much of the world considers occupied territory, and where Palestinians say their own state should be.
Israel's ever-expanding settlement enterprise, which controls over half of the West Bank, including its water aquifers and the most fertile lands, has made a Swiss cheese out of the Palestinian territory.
Many Jewish settlers want to stay put for religious, nationalist, and economic reasons. Would these settlements be evacuated? What about the borders around Jerusalem? Which brings us to problem number 2. Jerusalem. If everything gets divided, who gets control over Jerusalem? Both Israel and Palestine claim the city as their capital. Jerusalem is the holiest city for the Jewish people, and for Muslims, it is the location of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the 3rd holiest site in Islam. One suggestion is to split the city into East Jerusalem and West Jerusalem. But in that scenario, who would control Jerusalem's Old City, home to the sites that both Muslims and Jews consider holy? The third main problem is that of refugees, also called the right of return. While most Jews associate 1948 with the founding of Israel and the War of Independence, Palestinians refer to the same period as the catastrophe, or the Nakba, a time when 700,000 Palestinian Arabs were expelled from their homes or fled. The right of return is the idea that those Palestinian refugees and their descendants, who now number in the millions, have the right to return to the property they or their ancestors left behind. But if Israel were to absorb all those refugees, it would no longer be a majority Jewish state. For many Israelis, the refugee problem lies at the feet of Arab nations, mainly Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria, that have withheld citizenship from Palestinians. They also point out that the country absorbed at least 850,000 Jews who were forced to leave Arab and Muslim countries in the mid-20th century.
Tiny Israel absorbed the Jewish refugees, but the vast Arab world refused to absorb the Palestinian refugees. Now, 63 years later, the Palestinians come to us and they say to Israel, accept the grandchildren, really, and the great-grandchildren of these refugees, thereby wiping out Israel's future as a Jewish state. So it's not going to happen.
Last but not least, security is arguably Israel's #1 concern. Are Palestinian leaders actually trying to fight terrorism? What will stop Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran, and other sworn enemies of Israel from using a Palestinian state as a launching pad for attacks on Israel? Will the Israeli army continue to operate in what Palestinians consider their sovereign territory? The Oslo Accords, in which both sides agreed to eventually trade land for peace, were signed over 25 years ago. But as you may have noticed, not a lot of progress has been made toward actual peace. To many, the 2-state solution seems like the most reasonable plan. There are just a few kinks to work out first.